Hey, and welcome back to this episode of the Empowered Nutrition Podcast. I'm super thrilled about our guest, Addie Holzmann. Addie, welcome to the show today.
Thank you. I'm super excited. This will be fun.
Same. Oh my gosh, I have like 1,000 questions in my mind already, but I'm going to quickly intro you. Addie is a doctor of physical therapy specializing in pre and postpartum athletes. She combines a postural restoration approach with pelvic floor therapy to teach people how to optimize core and pelvic floor function while moving through motherhood. Addie provides in-person PT services along with her online programs to birth and back postpartum program and her core to floor workouts. I can't wait to chat with you, Addie.
Yeah.
And we're neighbors. I'm in our practice is in Southern Pines, North Carolina, and it sounds like you're located in this area as well.
Yes, Whispering Pines. So we are neighbors, and I'm super excited to have more resources to refer clients out that I know need nutritional support because there's a lot of them.
Well, and likewise, I'm excited to have more support with pelvic floor PT, and I want to talk a lot about today the connections there between those two things. But maybe you could just start us off with tell us a little bit about how you got into pelvic floor therapy and who are some. It sounds like moms are some of the top people you work with, but maybe flesh out a little bit more for us of who you help.
Yeah, so I've always had an interest in pelvic floor, even in grad or PT school, but it was almost 6 years ago now, which sounds like a long time, that I really started to dive in when I was pregnant with my third. And so just kind of learning by going through it, what works, what doesn't work. And then I started taking more courses, and in 2018, I branched out to my own business because we're military. We were getting prepped to move.
Yeah.
And so it was just through a deployment, all the things.
Yeah. We're military too. I don't know if you know that, but we're have so much in common.
Yeah.
That's also why I have a business.
Yeah. And it's great to have the flexibility of being your own boss.
Yeah.
And so it's just, I affiliate with SLAM, Stroller Strong Moms, or Sweat Like a Mother. And so I do a lot of pelvic floor and core information for them and all their affiliates, which is really fun, and built to birth and back in conjunction with them. And so mother athletes are like my jam. It makes my heart so sad when people are like, oh, I can't do this because I leak, or I can't do this because my pelvic floor is falling out, and I'm like, oh, we can do something about that. And then I'm here now, and business is good, and I'm seeing a lot of people.
Awesome. Yeah. So I think that maybe one obvious question, it might be obvious, but tell me a little bit about why moms. Tell me about some of the common struggles they have. Maybe we can just get really honest about it. I'll tell you, if I can jump rope, but 3 kids in, and if I try to do double unders, for some reason I pee my pants. So what's up with that? What other issues are you helping women with aside from peeing their pants? What do you work with people on?
Yeah. So most people, for one, everyone has a pelvic floor. It's not just women or moms, but kids and males and everybody. But we don't really pay attention until there's a problem. And the pelvic floor has some pretty crucial roles, like supporting your pelvic organs and sphincter control, and, even supporting the joints of the pelvis. And so when those things go astray, we start paying attention. But moms are such a big population in pelvic floor dysfunction just because of the drastic changes that happen during pregnancy, with posture and breathing patterns and the weight of the baby and hormone fluctuations. I mean, you name it, and it's happening. And then recovering postpartum, and depending on what kind of birth you had, if you had tearing or a C-section or long pushing phase, or whatever the case is, healing after birth is so crucial. And I don't think it's not common practice yet to really arm moms with the knowledge and resources to truly get back to a baseline, and then you have more kids and things kind of pile up. So
yeah, time for self-care.
yeah, but that's just the population. Most of my clients are moms, but anyone can have pelvic floor dysfunction. So even like erectile dysfunction, constipation, hemorrhoids, those are all pelvic floor issues. So my biggest issue was prolapse. And so that was what really like drove me into pelvic floor PT. And it takes a while. You hear the 6 weeks, go back to whatever you want to do. And it's it took me I was doing things, but until I really felt myself again, it was like 2 to 3 years before I felt like I could do stuff without symptoms. So it's a lot longer than we want to think it is.
Yeah, I think it's cool how you pointed out that like there's more to it than just that. Like I think maybe it's just me, but it's like I imagine like, okay, like a baby just came through here, so like that's the issue, and like it's obviously a big part of it. But like the hormonal changes of like the pregnancy and the postpartum period, the whole period of pregnancy of like supporting the weight of the baby, and then maybe tell me some other things like postpartum that almost might be like. I hate to say mistakes, or maybe just things that like people don't know that they should be doing like postpartum that you wish women would do.
Yeah. So I think postpartum recovery is so unique in the fact that I can't really think of any other surgery or situation or injury where you have a drastic change in your body and then you have to care for another human being. And maybe you're breastfeeding, maybe, whatever. And so just like doing the best with what we have, because even like C-section moms, that's a major abdominal surgery. And people just pass it off like, oh, yeah, you had a C-section, go home and rest.
So
how are you supposed to rest?
Yeah.
You're a mom. So it's not only like all these physical changes, but social changes, maybe changes in your sleep, your diet, your literally everything. And all of those factors are really important to healing. So I see some common threads. One is who was totally me, the mom who jumped in way too fast and was like, I got this. I feel good. Let's go for a little jog 3 weeks postpartum. I don't recommend. And then you have another set of moms who like are told to rest, and they do, and that's awesome. And then they're told, oh, you're 6 weeks, you're 8 weeks postpartum, just jump into whatever you want to do. And there's no guidance there. It's like 0 to 60. And then they're like, cool, I'm feeling good. I can do whatever. And then maybe they go on a run or they lift without that rebuilding and that progression back to activity. And then they feel like crap because their body just isn't prepped for that level of activity. So that's actually why I made To Birth and Back, to bridge that gap, to restore and rebuild the core and the pelvic floor so that at 6 to 8, 12 weeks postpartum, you're more ready to go back into those things. So thinking of just like a gradual rebuilding back to what you want to do and not this like, all out or like,
okay.
So, and of course, pelvic floor PT. Everyone. So this blows my mind in France specifically, but I think a lot of the European countries, pelvic floor therapy postpartum is like standard of care. In France, they get 10 visits right off the bat.
So awesome. I think I've heard this. I'm like, seriously?
And it's like, here, sometimes you're fighting for referrals and you're like trying to convince your provider that you need PT. And so advocate for yourself. Like moms really need to advocate for themselves.
Okay. And then when we say pelvic floor PT, I don't want to bore this conversation, but I'm a little confused in terms of like, okay, so like in our clinic, we actually like share space with like a visceral therapist who's not a physical therapist. And then we do a lot of like GI work. So like we'll have a lot of people work with that person for like abdominal adhesions and things like that. And then recently I was talking with a pelvic floor PT and she was like, well, no, we do the visceral therapy like in the abdominal area as a part of pelvic PT, and I thought it was more just pelvic floor. Can you get like very specific with me about like what are you actually doing and like working on? Like tell me like what is like, are you putting stuff in people's vaginas? Are you rubbing their stomach? Like what, I mean, when I just talk to you, I like feel like I should be doing Kegels, but like what else is happening here?
So that's going to largely depend on the training of the PT. So for instance, like I like treated pelvic floor externally for 3 years before I started internal assessments. So there are people out there that, and you wouldn't specifically call them a pelvic floor PT because that term is kind of suggesting that they've had the internal assessment and treatment training.
Okay.
But so it's, and then there are PTs that go into the visceral work and have training there. So it's gonna depend on the education of your therapist. But typically the term pelvic floor PT, at some point in the treatment plan, if the client is comfortable with it and open to it, there's a pelvic floor assessment. So looking at the strength of your pelvic floor muscles, where's the tension? Is there asymmetry? Is there coordination with your breath? Can you lengthen the pelvic floor muscles? Are they kind of like like sitting more in a lowered position, or do they like to sit up higher? How do they move and function with different pelvic hip positions? Like that's what I do with my clients, and trying to teach them how to sense and control their pelvic floor with breath and movement. And then there's like biofeedback. So some PTs will use like intervaginal probes that kind of have a monitor, and it shows you when you're contracting and when you're relaxing. So you can kind of train your brain to like know what's going on. And then other people use ultrasound. And so they can see when muscles are contracting and relaxing. So there's like so many things that you can use in different trainings. So that's, I'm always preaching like find a PT, and this goes for any professional, but find someone you click with and that listens to you, and that like, you know, your goals are aligning, right? Because I think my people that come to me are usually athletes, and if I had them on the table every single session just doing biofeedback, I don't think they'd be very happy with me.
Because they want to exercise it.
They want to know how to squat and deadlift and run without symptoms. So we work a lot more on movement. And I take, with the postural restoration, I take more of a whole body approach. And it's funny, like today I'm going to be doing a talk on how the foot mobility and toe mobility affects our pelvic floor. And there's like a direct relationship there. So really pelvic floor is like, because that pelvic floor is part of your core system, the diaphragm, your transverse abs, pelvic floor, in the base of all your movements, it really can be tied to a lot of different like symptoms and pain.
Okay, cool. And then tell me, I mean, like, first of all, that's super fascinating, because I was imagining this all as sort of like a conditioning thing where you're like, and I'm sure that's a huge part of it, like strengthening and toning. But yeah, that neural connection makes sense of like you're building that connection, like that, like what you said, biofeedback with the brain connecting and controlling well the pelvic tone by building that neural connection is really interesting. And then I know offline, like you and I talked like a little bit about the way that like our pelvic floor function may actually differ across like the month and our menstrual cycle. And I'm curious like to hear more about like, how do you incorporate that fact into like your work with your clients?
Yeah. So, I want to like touch on Kegels just for 1 second. Kegel, they're the same thing. Tomato. But so many people, including like doctors, think that's all we do. And I don't really use Kegels.
Really? What?
I know, right? I teach people how to move their pelvic floor, both lengthening and contracting, but then like how to position their thorax and pelvis and hips to like optimize that. So pelvic floor does not equal Kegels or pelvic floor therapy. Just,
Okay.
You know, if all
you're like next
Kegels,
level, like if people work with you, they don't need Kegels.
Gradually, like I think our profession is kind of moving in the direction of more a whole body approach. But I just want a PSA. If all you're doing is Kegels and pelvic floor therapy, you might want to rethink. So anyway, hormones are fascinating, and I just got into this last year. I took Stacy Sims' Women Are Not Small Men course, and she works with like elite athletes, mostly triathletes and those like big sports, but she is amazing. And ever since I started tracking my cycle, just for reference, I'm not on hormonal birth control, so I have those natural ebbs and flows of hormones. And then once you learn your cycle, and then you can start adjusting your exercise and your workouts to whatever phase you're in. Oh my gosh, it's a game changer. It is like, I mean, have you ever had like a workout where you're like all ready for it and you start doing it and you're like, oh my gosh, my legs are lead. I can't run fast. Like, what is going on? Like, this weight seems so heavy. It shouldn't be that heavy. And then you just get frustrated because you're wondering what's going on.
And then there's other times where you like crush it.
Yes, exactly. So kind of knowing what your hormones are doing and what phase in your cycle you are minimizes a lot of that frustration, because that week leading up to your period, you're probably not going to feel the greatest, like low energy, more sluggish. We have more inflammation in our bodies at that time. Our blood is more viscous or like thicker, so the circulation is more poor, which also goes into pelvic floor symptoms, because a lot of people feel more prolapse symptoms like leading up to their period, or more leaking if they have issues with leaking. So if you're tracking your cycle and kind of tracking your symptoms, you can see, are my symptoms related to my cycle and my hormone levels, or is it related to specifically the activity I'm doing?
Okay. So it sounds like what part of what you do is like the week leading up to your period. First of all, cycling in general, like so game changing. Like I'm always wonder, like, how did I used to like not do this?
I know, right? It's awesome.
Like, what in the world? So, and there's like a ton of apps for that. I don't know if you have a favorite one, but
I do. The Wild AI app has been it's amazing. It's got so much information, but it was developed by Stacy Sims and her team, and it literally tracks your cycle, so you know what day you're on, but also it gives you tidbits on nutrition and training, and how, like, it'll say, work on more. If you're like in that front half of your cycle, the follicular phase, like more weight, or do more higher intensity, high power, whatever. And it'll tell you specifically how to gear your workouts for where you're at.
Okay, so people can use it to help learn what do you like, because first step obviously is to know where you're at in your cycle, but then the next question is like, well, and so what? Like, what do I do based off where I am? It sounds like they will tell you that.
Yeah, that has a lot of great information. And then her book, Roar, was actually where I started with all this a couple years ago. And she has specific things and even nutrition tips for like certain points in your cycle. So I would say the first thing would be to start tracking your cycle if you don't already track it, and knowing, like, if you're on hormonal birth control, that makes it a little bit different, right? Because your hormones are not ebb and flowing. And so the copper IUD is going to be more like, it doesn't really mess with your hormones as much. But if you're on hormonal birth control, so you have these like blips, let's say you take your birth control at night, every 12 hours, there's like a half-life of the pill, right? So because the pill increases your hormone levels, you want to train at 12 hours opposite of that. So if you take, let's say you take it 7 o'clock at night, you want to train at 7 in the morning, because that's when your hormones are going to be the lowest. And so
you would train when your hormones are low.
Yes, we are. It's really funny, but we are most like men hormonally during our period, because that's when our hormones drop off and are at the lowest phase. And so that's when we can really maximize our VO2 max, our intensity, PR in weight training, all of those good things. So, yeah.
Okay. So because you're like flatlining the week leading up to your period too.
Leading up to your period, they're a little bit more elevated. So yeah, a couple days before, the hormones will drop, which initiates like the period to come.
Okay.
But so the follicular phase, that first half before ovulation, is what most people call like the lower hormone phase, and then the second half, the luteal phase, is more when those hormones are higher. And it's gonna, depending on what hormone you're talking about, it depends. But when your period hits, you kind of take a dip for a few days. And so that's when you can really maximize on your performance if you don't have like a lot of cramping and pain, you know. So that's like the benefit of, I think, like using nutrition and training around your cycle to like really get those hormones more leveled out. Because I used to like feel like crap like during my period. And now, like, just tuning in, it's like when it hits, I'm like, yes, like I'm ready to go. Like, give me like all of the workouts I want. I'm like, it's like a new start. So there's something to be said about like if your hormones are way out of whack and you're having a lot of symptoms, you should probably work on that first.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's how we actually originally connected, is like someone connected us because I will use a lot of like nutrition cycling with across the month, like with where your hormones are at for women, and then of course with you like recommend to cycle your training as well. I think that you're right that maybe it's great to go ahead and start cycling your training, but like if you don't feel well enough when you have your period to even do that, that's often like something that nutrition can help with.
Yeah, for sure.
And then pairing up macronutrients too with like when it's time to do that more intense exercise and with those heavier weights, making sure that the nutrition is matching, like almost like from a sports nutrition perspective, is I think really important as well. And then one thing that's kind of fascinating for me about that too is like on those phases where like the estrogen peaks are like at their highest, we actually need to use like one natural way that our body like addresses that is like dietary fiber helps like bind and eliminate hormones. And so a lot
through
of times
poop, right? Like pooping? Yeah. So pelvic floor health. Make sure you're not constipated.
Totally. It's so connected. Getting more fiber during that time is important. And, being able to do something with the fiber, like move your bowels, obviously is like critical. So you're not just feeling horrible when you do have more fiber.
Yeah. And another thing too, I think that nutrition can help a lot with is the inflammation. And so like leading up to your period, that like 5 or so days before, your inflammation is higher because it's actually what triggers it. And so that's another reason why people tend to feel a little bit like crappy right before. But, you know, using your nutrition. And this is like where like I need you more in my life because I really stink at my nutrition.
We can do a trade.
I'm like,
okay, you can help me with my jet bro problem and I'll help you with it.
I would love that because if I'm getting like my water intake, I feel like it's a good day. I'm just like, so I need nutrition is hard to like
it's
like
so that's like the passion of my life, is not just the science, but like helping busy women to make it happen in our real lives is the real like hat trick of for us, I think, of what we do.
I totally need that.
It's like wild to me, the power of it, in the sense of like what we're talking about. Like a lot of times I'll have a client where we're not even working on like menstrual symptoms as like our primary target, but then we track their symptoms like every visit. When they come back, they've rescored a bunch of different things for us. And a lot of times it will be like, oh, wow, yeah, like my PMS is like gone or almost gone or greatly diminished. And like my other menstrual symptoms, just by working on with nutrition. What's nice is like, it's like unifying in the sense of like, it's an underlying driver of like a lot of things with like health and how you feel, and what's right for one thing is usually right for most things. And so when you are working on it overall for some maybe other reason, you end up getting all these like side benefits of like, wow, like I'm not yelling at my kids every time, my husband every time I'm period these days. Like that's nice.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I feel like people so undervalue like the importance of what they're taking in. Like it blows my mind like how it's just like, no, that really does matter. Like your fuel matters. Like you have to like.
I think what fascinates me is that like that's true, and at the same time, people are hyper focused on nutrition. And what is the disconnect there? I think it's more the focus is always on like, what do you cut out? What do you avoid? What do you diet on? Like, how do you count your macros? And like, none of that speaks to like, what do you increase? What's nourishing? What's anti-inflammatory? What's something you want to promote and increase and add? And you know, food. Like, I don't think people like really think of food in that way as much, but yeah,
it's amazing. I wanted in my first career of choice when I was in middle school was a dietitian. Like I wanted to be a dietitian, and then somehow I veered the other way. It's amazing.
What you're doing is awesome. There's such a synergy there. And I think it's really fascinating to hear more about like the specific things you do. And I think that's a really good tip of like, maybe it sounds like the Wild AI app like starts with, it will give people a little bit of context of like what to do across their cycle training wise. But it sounds like if somebody has where they want more individualized support, or they're struggling with things like you said, leaking, probably pain, like vaginal pain, like pain during intercourse. Tell me some other main things that would like drive people to reach out to you.
Yes, like all of the things you said. I get a lot of pelvic girdle pain, like SI and pubic. So like the joints in your pelvis. Hip pain, diastasis recti is a big one postpartum. So that core system. And no matter like what the issue is, that core system, diaphragm, pelvic floor, your deep transverse abs, it has to work together. It has to coordinate your breathing. This is why breathing is so important. And most people are like, breathing. Like I do it all the time. I have to be good at it. Well, you might not be good at it. So it's the only thing we do from birth to death, right? 24/7 is breathe. And so if your breathing patterns are not allowing that diaphragm to fully move up and down so that you can actually use it as a respiration muscle, your ribs aren't allowing that diaphragm to move, your pelvic floor then should be responding to your diaphragm. So if your diaphragm's not moving for whatever reason, it's not, your pelvic floor might not be moving in its range of motion. And the definition of strength is to be able to move a muscle through the entire range of motion with control. And so a pelvic floor that's too tight or just like hanging out in a shortened position is not strong. It's actually is linked to a lot of issues with incontinence and a lot of athletes, which is why I don't do a lot of Kegels, because I see a lot of athletes and your pelvic floor is working with your workouts. How it's working, that's to be determined, but it is working. And so
it's like you're already strong, you need more the relaxing part.
You gotta be able to let go. And and a lot of these things might link, like painful sex. If you're and there's a lot of reasons for painful sex, but on a muscular level, if you're too shortened or tightened or tense, it's not going to feel good because there's not enough mobility in those pelvic floor muscles to respond to the activity, right? And so let's say you're working out a whole lot and you're lifting a lot of weight, or you increase the frequency of your running or distance or whatever, because this happens to me a lot. If I do too much like too much of a jump, sex becomes not very comfortable because my pelvic floor is just like, like so tight. And so like the goal is to get that core system synchronized, coordinating, working together. But it's very, I don't know if I've ever seen someone with only one symptom. Because usually if something's off, it's like kind of a chain reaction and things. So that pelvic floor should be leaking and painful sex and prolapse are probably the most common things I see.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about, like, if somebody's going to work with you, how does it go? Is it like there's an assessment and you would maybe lay out like, okay, here's like a kind of a care plan of like, let's meet this often for this amount of time, or how does that typically go?
Yeah. So I have online booking. So usually people will like hear word of mouth or contact me somehow and ask about things. And so the initial first visit is getting to know each other, getting their story. It's amazing what you can the connections you can make just by hearing someone's story and like all the things that are going on. And then a movement assessment. I don't think I've ever done a pelvic floor assessment the first visit, just because there is so much that needs to get done that first visit. I mean, I could just sit and talk for an hour with somebody, but I only have an hour. And so I want to see like how they're bending, how they're squatting, what their hip range of motion's like, what position their pelvis likes to be in, how they're breathing, their rib mobility, all of those things. Because again, the pelvic floor is like, those muscles are not very big. They live in the pelvis. They're nothing compared to your abs and hamstrings and inner thighs and glutes. And all those muscles are affecting the position of your pelvis and hips. So if something's off there and you're not able to have the full mobility of your pelvis, hips, torso, thorax, whatever, it's going to affect the position of those pelvic floor muscles. And if they're in a position where they can't fully lengthen and fully contract, they're not going to work as best they should. So in that holistic approach, I'm all about like, okay, we need to get your ribs moving. If there was one thing I could work on with every diagnosis, not even just pelvic floor, but in general, it would be rib mobility, because those ribs like dictate so much. Think of like an umbrella, like the ribs are like an umbrella. And your diaphragm's like this, your diaphragm's like underneath like a parachute. I give the I won't get into that. Anyway, so umbrella. As you exhale, that umbrella should close. As you inhale, that umbrella should open. And after pregnancy, when your abs have been really stretched out and you've kind of been living in that extended position, I call it a cracked egg. If you imagine your rib cage as like those plastic Easter eggs, your rib cage is the top and the pelvis is the bottom. You want to stack your egg, right? But during pregnancy, you're like open in the front. You're like cracked. And so you have to retrain that posture and those breathing patterns and all of those things to kind of get control of that pelvic floor. So the big muscles around the pelvis and in the core are very influential in how those pelvic floor muscles are working, which is why I could treat a lot of pelvic floor issues like leaking, like the movement-based things with an external approach, because you have to be breathing and pressure management are the top two things I teach people, because that pressure, your pelvic floor helps to create and maintain pressure, like if you're lifting or running or exerting yourself. So those two things. Very important.
This might seem like from out of nowhere, but what you're saying just reminded me so much of like, I feel like it can be kind of polarizing so we're a functional medicine practice, and like people can be excited by that or turned off by that or confused by that. And no matter which of those they are, I always just say, look, all that really means is that what we do is we take you from like where you're in a conventional setting where you're looking more like right at the issue and just trying to address that symptom. We're trying to look deeper at like what are the underlying drivers of that problem and address it more at the root so that you can get healthier overall, have better outcomes and like more long lasting outcomes by addressing the root cause. And I think really in the end, there's not really much that's special about it. Like any good practitioner is always to the best of their like environment and ability trying to do that. And
Mm-hmm.
that's really what we're talking about of like, look, you've got problems with your pelvic floor. If you're just thinking about like we were talking about like Kegels, that's maybe like the most pressing obvious thing of like, hey, you're leaking urine into your pants. Maybe you should tighten that muscle that holds that in. But really the big picture is like you've got these larger muscles that are disorienting the pelvis. You've got problems with your, like you said, your rib, like maybe like tone and positioning, and potentially even like your neural innervation and like the neural tone that innervates your ribs and like and
Oh,
control
yes.
how it expands, and that gets into like sympathetic nervous tone with like the high stress environment that we're in, like as moms and just in our world, and like high cadence of life. And so that's really fascinating to hear how you think about it in terms of like you're thinking about those more underlying drivers and like how do you address that so that the symptom will kind of like resolve itself once you like get where those root cause things are like resolved.
Yeah. I love that you talk about the nervous system. Actually, I have a book right here. Have you ever read this book? Oops.
No. See,
Oh my
why
gosh.
zebras don't get ulcers?
Yes.
No.
You need to read it because this talks all about stress and how it affects every single system in our
Girl.
body.
I probably know
And
that, right? Because it'd be like too stressful for me because I know I'm stressed.
and so like
Anxiety-inducing.
I know. Like the nervous system is our command center for everything. I mean, and so most of my approach is like nervous system based because the nervous system is dictating your movement patterns and your posture and your breathing. So a lot of people, when they're stressed or in like these seasons of high stress, postpartum, moving, military life, deployments, all those things, their symptoms will get worse.
Yeah.
Because their breathing patterns are changing, right? They're more in that sympathetic fight or flight drive. Like they're just, that neck is cranked, those ribs are open, like ready to go. And so stress drives everything.
Yeah.
And the nervous system drives everything. So I love that you have that like same outlook because it's overlooked. It's grossly overlooked in PT.
Yeah.
We always want to go muscles. What are the muscles doing? What's the skeleton doing? It's like, no, what is the nervous system making the skeletal muscles doing? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
it's
so
crazy.
Interesting. Well, Addie, I feel like we could chat all day. Maybe we'll have to do round 2. I want to talk to you more about GI and pelvic floor, if that's okay. Maybe round 2. And
yeah, I'd love it.
Yeah. Meanwhile, we talked one-on-one. And tell me a little bit real quickly about your you've got a couple of like online programs, and can you tell us more about that?
Yeah. So I created To Birth and Back 2019. Was my first, so it's been a while. And then I made it an online program. And so it's a 6-week, 2-day-a-week program that kind of rebuilds your breathing patterns, your posture, your awareness of movement to prep you to get back into working out. However, people with symptoms, leaking, prolapse, joint pains could also benefit from it just by relearning those movement mechanics and like optimizing their core.
So you don't have to be where you're like postpartum.
No, and I have a lot of moms who reuse it. Like they'll use it during postpartum, then they'll have another baby and they use it again. It's lifetime access. So once you buy it, you have it. And then there's a movement professional version that can get 12 hours of credit with ACE, or you can petition for other like credentialing bodies. But that's that's 12 hours of more in-depth stuff. And then I have Core to Floor Workouts, which is a subscription service. So that's where I'm teaching people how to blend PT concepts in with their workouts to move through their workout more efficiently and with better core control and awareness of their pelvic floor so that they are not getting symptoms, hopefully, during workouts.
Love that.
So
like power lift like you're doing yoga. I was like, I think of it, I was like channel my yoga, like breathe while I'm squatting 160 pounds or whatever.
Yeah, so it's like little tidbits sometimes goes surprisingly a long ways
Yeah.
when you're doing stuff, especially like jumping, like how to
Mhm.
position your ribs over your pelvis and how to breathe through jumping.
Yeah, girl, I get
Something.
with you.
I'm happy to help. Jumping is one of my favorite
Awesome.
things. So
I think
yeah.
it must be I know it's something about because I can jump singles. Like that gets back to like what we're talking about with the nerves. I can jump singles just fine, but when you're doing double unders, it takes up so much of my brain bandwidth to coordinate
Yep.
that like it's almost like I lose the neural capacity to like also keep the
There's
pelvic floor closed, like whatever that is. It
so
feels like
there's
that.
Yes, there's two things I see commonly with double unders. One is breath holding because maybe you're focusing so hard or
Yeah.
you're like
Yeah.
trying
Like
to
so
hang in the air.
focused.
Yeah. So you almost need to you need to hang in the air a little bit longer to get the rope under twice.
Uh-huh.
And so when people do that, they breath hold or they crack their egg. And so they kind of brace through their chest in
Okay.
overuse
Yeah.
spinal extension, which then your abs elongate. And if your abs are elongating, the front of your pelvic floor is elongating. So that's a lot of pressure
Yeah.
down. And so, and sometimes
Makes
people do
sense.
both. They breath hold
Oh,
and they extend. And so it's a lot of pressure down on the pelvic floor.
that's so fascinating. You're like
Yeah.
worth your weight in gold, honestly. Okay, so we've got you've got the birth and back, and then core to floor. It sounds like is something that people can also take advantage of.
Yep, that's like a workout library. There's like over 60 workouts in there of different
Cool.
under different categories. Yep.
Awesome.
So,
And it
yeah.
sounds like if people want to check it out, there's a way you can use a code. There's a discount code, Mom Strong, that we'll put in the show notes. You can get 20% off of birth to back. And it sounds like you also offer a free month of core to floor when you sign up. Is that right?
Yep. Yeah, and you can cancel
Awesome.
anytime. So you can check it
Cool.
out and then yeah.
Awesome. And then with one-on-ones, it looks like you're out of network, but you might be willing to provide like super bills for people to like put in claims to out of network coverage.
Yes, I do super bills. Yes, with TRICARE will cover. Select is easy. Prime does need a referral and authorization. But I have package deals which come out to like just less per session if you don't have TRICARE. And then I do offer super bills if your insurance will accept those for reimbursement.
Awesome. Okay, Addie, and tell people where they can find you on like your website and on Instagram.
My website is numiphysio.com and my Instagram is at Addie Holzmann.
Cool.
And then Facebook is Numi Physio.
Cool. And then we'll put
All the
that
things.
in the show notes as well, so people can just click on
Awesome.
over there.
Cool. Well, this was so
Awesome.
fun. I feel like we could have gone down so many rabbit holes.
I know. I'm like
So
holding
much to
back.
talk about.
For sure, we need a round two, Addie. I'm gonna get you
Sounds
on
good.
the. We're gonna go from fun talk to fun talk, like
I
painful
love it.
sex to constipation. Like it's gonna be great.
That's awesome. I
This is
love
where
it.
we live. Like this is our zone.
Yes. And then maybe we can meet in person and then we can just
Let's do
really
it.
nerd out.
Yes, sounds perfect.
Good
Thanks,
deal.
Addie. It was so nice to meet
Thank
you.
you.
And we'll talk to you next time we have you on the show.
Sounds good. Thank you. Have a great day.